Right, Rook and Pawn versus Rook horizontal cutoffs. This is going to be the third video in Rook and Pawn versus Rook horizontal cutoffs. The first video was just sort of me messing around against Stockfish, showing you how you win each of those horizontal cutoffs, and I guess more importantly, which ones are won and which ones are not won. And then the second video at the start of it, I promised 12 different games or positions from games, 12 different games, and then my recording software decided to stop helping me out with that after 9 of those 12 games. So I've got 3 of them to finish off. Strongly recommend you watch the Rook and Pawn versus Rook horizontal cutoffs 1 video. Otherwise you might not know, before this one, otherwise you might not know what's actually going on. The 3 games that we've got left to show, they've got some pretty interesting things going on in them, with a few twists and turns, maybe a bit more interesting than the previous 9. And, well, I won't say too much more, but yeah, there's some things in there that are definitely instructive. So this first one, this is a game from 2011. It's white to play. Pause the video and decide, do you want to play King D5 or King D3? Which one do you think you should play? So white's got 2 drawing moves in this position. One of them's King D4, which I didn't offer you as a choice, but the other one is indeed King D3. And we're trying to avoid the horizontal cut-off, basically, because it's just a killer. Once that perfect horizontal cut has been achieved, it's actually pretty easy to convert, especially for a knight's pawn and also for a bishop's pawn. We've got a bishop's pawn here. I mean, the thing about King D3, the reason you might have rejected it is Rook E6, because now we've got a vertical cutoff. But this is a vertical cutoff by 1 file, and this black pawn hasn't reached the 5th rank yet, which means it's a draw as long as you can get your king and rook as white into the correct defensive places. Your king is already in the correct defensive place, which is sort of as close to the action as can possibly be, given that they're cut off from the E file. You want your rook delivering checks or attacking the F pawn from the front. That's what you've got to achieve here. So yeah, Rook C1. I mean, the point if the black king advances, then we're just going to deliver those checks. The black king can make it to H3, at which point we play Rook F1, attacking the F5 pawn. That's the bit where if we had a 2 file cutoff, black would then. Well, it's a bit annoying. The rook's on the 3rd rank, but let's say, imagine the black rook was back on E8, which black could easily have engineered before they started the king zigzagging. Black would just play Rook F8, and that's the Grigoriev combined method, and it would be a win. But it's only a 1 file vertical cutoff, so that's just not going to work here, and it's just going to be a draw. Black might try something cheeky like F4, thinking, aha, my pawn's on the 5th rank, and it's like, yeah, but I'm cutting off your king now. Rook C5, and yeah, that's going to lead to a draw. So King D3 was the way to draw that, with a bit of knowledge on how to deal with that 1 file vertical cutoff. I guess in the game, that's what the player with the white piece was worried about, that vertical cutoff, because they blundered away the win with King D5. Right, what would you now do as black? What move should you just immediately play, knowing it's a win? Okay, if you don't get this inside 2 seconds, you didn't watch Horizontal Cutoffs 1 video. It's just Rook G4. Done. Okay. And I demonstrated that win against Stockfish with a knight's pawn, and also with a bishop's pawn. It's very easy to convert. That's an easy win for black. The player with the black pieces at the time obviously didn't know that, because they played what looks like a sensible move, but a wrong move, King G5. You wouldn't know this, by the way. I mean, if I had this position in the game, I wouldn't know that Rook G4 is the only winning move. No chance I'd know that. But I would know that Rook G4 is a winning move. I absolutely would know that Rook G4 wins, because it's a perfect horizontal cut. As it turns out, King G5, which you think, yeah, that might win as well, I don't know. It doesn't, it's a draw. And the way that white draws it is very similar to what we just talked about with the vertical cutoff defense. Rook down to C1, and we're just going to deliver a bunch of checks. So rook c1, black gets their rook out the way, rook a6, and now that bunch of checks starts. Rather than wait for a bunch of checks with a sort of, I don't know, black could do some zigzag messing about here, couldn't they, before popping out onto f6 and finally taking some cover. Rather than go through that bunch of checks, black just went back to f6 straight away. Now, what would you do here as white? Next move. You've only got one drawing move. What is it? Why? Why is it the only drawing move? What's the absolute massive important thing here? And this is the absolute massive important thing here. Black is threatening a perfect horizontal cut. So you've got to stop that. King d4. Black tried this, rook a3, which is quite good, but this is now an imperfect cut, and it's imperfect because the cutting off of the rook is 2 ranks in front of this pawn. Okay, now that's a draw, so long as you know how to draw it. Once you know how to draw this as white, it's very, very easy. It's such an easy draw. I drew it against Stockfish. I just didn't do anything. It was so easy once you know how to draw it. The player with the white pieces in this 2011 game didn't know how you draw it, and they played rook f1. Oops. Okay. All you've got to do is make sure your king's on d4, which is the best place it can get to. It can't get to any of these free squares. It's got to be ready to come to e4. You've got to meet f4 with king e4, and just keep your rook on the g file. It really is as simple as that. There's just no way for black to make any progress at all. Just keep your rook on the g file. Rook g2, rook g8, rook g. That's it actually, isn't it? Rook g2 and rook g8. All the other squares are covered, but you know black can't cover all squares on the g file, so that's just going to be a draw. So in the game, rook f1 was played, and it's now a win for black. King g5, and I don't think there were any other twists and turns. I guess rook g1 would have been followed by rook g3 check there. And there it is, back to another perfect horizontal cut. Few more moves were seen. Black decided to instead go for the one file vertical cutoff, which would be my preferred method of converting these. And the Lucena position was reached pretty quickly and was converted textbook style with rook d5, rook to black's 4th rank, and in that position white resigned. Right, next, this is a game from 1970. It's Taimanov versus Larsen, so pretty high profile players. It is black to play. What would you do here? Pause the video and decide. So king f4 is a drawing move, but sticking with the principles of everything we've been discussing, the best way to draw this, that definitely follows on from what we've already talked about, is just start delivering that barrage of checks. Rook h8 check. The white king might pop out the front, and soon realise there's not enough space for the white king to advance, and it would have to go back, eventually settling on g3. Okay. At this point, remember that white is it's pretty much the same as the previous game in a way, except we've got a knight's pawn instead of a bishop's pawn. White is threatening a perfect horizontal cut, so there are 2 drawing moves here rather than just one. Although why you'd play the second one, I have no idea. But they're both to prevent this. Interestingly, in that other game we just saw, the other drawing move wasn't a drawing move, as in king e5 draws and also king d5 draws here. That wasn't the case in the other position, and I don't even care why, because why wouldn't you just play king e5? So king e5. White might try an imperfect cut. What would you do here as black? What has black got to play here? The king's already in the best place. There's not anywhere else it can go. It does stand ready to play king f5 against white's g5. You just got to maintain control of the h file. So rook h1, rook h7, they're your two drawing moves. Just keep your rook on the h file, and it's a draw. In the game, Larson played king e5, and now it's a loss. What should you do here as white? Well, same idea. You deliver the imperfect horizontal cut, but it's too late for black to occupy the h file. Rook h8 check, king g5. This time the king can pop out on the front because the rook is on the 6th rank ready to block the check. Rook g8, g5, we have a perfect horizontal cutoff, and the Lucena position is going to be reached very soon. So Larson didn't play rook h8, he played king f4, but then we saw rook f6 check, king e5, g5. Again, perfect horizontal cut, and I think Larson then just resigned. Last but not least, this is a game from 2015. It is black to play. Mark Hebden was actually black in this game. So yeah, I mean, given that I'm talking to Belper players and Derbyshire players mainly, I presume, unless these videos one day go viral, yeah, you probably see Mark floating about on the Congress circuit. I certainly have. He's smashed me up a couple of times in rapid play format. But what did he do here, back in this 2015 game? Black to play, pause the video and decide what should you do. So this is actually a very difficult position for black, because what we've got here is a 2-file vertical cutoff. White's pawn's on the 4th rank, which ordinarily means that white can just drop their rook back on the e-file and do the Grigoriev combined method, and it's just a win for white. It's just a textbook win. The problem is that it doesn't work for a knight's pawn, because the Grigoriev combined method would mean that the white king has to make its way to the I6 square, and there isn't an I-file in a game of chess. So it's actually a draw, because the white king hasn't got enough space to zigzag and come to the I6 square, because the I6 square doesn't exist. But the white king does have enough space to zigzag up the board and use the rook that's already nicely placed to deliver a block on some of those checks. So to draw this, you have to get the rook out of there. You've got to get the rook out of there. Okay, and the only drawing move is king d6. And if rook e4, you've still got to hassle the rook. Only drawing move. So it is a draw with a knight's pawn, even with a 2-file vertical cutoff, because white hasn't got enough space to do the Grigoriev combined method. But you've got to get the white rook out of there, basically. Now in the game, the player with the black pieces, which I've already said was Mark Hebden, didn't clock that at the time. He might have known that, I don't know, but he didn't play, and he played rook f8 check, and that's now chucked away the draw. King g3 was played. Then the rook was hassled. I mean, there weren't really any other moves, but it's too late. You know, we might see rook g8, but then the white king can march in. Like I said, there it is. There's the block. That's why we wanted the rook out of there. So after king g3, black did hassle the white rook. What would you play here as white? We've kind of moved on to vertical cutoff rather than horizontal cutoffs, but as I keep saying in a lot of these videos, it's you know, chess themes and concepts, they can't be studied in a vacuum. There is some horizontal cutoff stuff coming up that meant that this went into this video, but yeah, what would we play here? What we would play here is rook back to the 4th rank, because black hasn't got enough time to attack the rook and prevent king f4 and king h4. So, I mean, this is actually what happened in the game, actually. Rook e4, king d5, and then the rook can challenge, the white rook can challenge the black rook on the f-file. So yeah, rook e4 was the only winning move. Rook went back to g8, and then rook f6. Excellent move. That is cutting off the black king from the 6th rank. King e5 was played. Also quite a good move. Now what would you do as white? White has only one winning move. This is an imperfect cut because the rook is 2 ranks in front of the pawn. In the game, the player with the white piece is now messed it up with rook a6, and black immediately just pounced with rook h8. Okay. Going back to this move, black kind of wants to play 2 moves. They want to play rook h8, and they want to play king e5. So to defend the imperfect horizontal cut, and I thought that was the more important thing, and that's why it's ended up in this video, you need your rook controlling the adjacent file, and you need your king on the e5 square, so that when white plays g5, you're ready to come in to e5. So if rook h8 gets played immediately, so I haven't got this prep, I guess we played g5. There's other winning moves, but oh yeah, king f4, but it's based on the same thing. We're stopping this. G5, king f3 is a winning move. That's mad. I have no idea why, but g5 is what I would play. And then if king e5, presumably king g4. Again, king f3 is a winning move there. I can't make any sense of that at all, and don't want to. So yeah, rook f6, king e5, white blundered with rook a6, and yeah, black pounced. And this is just incredibly easy to defend once you know what you're doing. And then, yeah, Mark did know what he was doing from this point forward. I predict that he actually knew what he was doing here. I predict he realised he was lost and desperately hoped that his opponent wouldn't let him onto the h-file. What white needed to play here is rook h6. If you've got an imperfect horizontal cut, the side that controls that adjacent file, in this case the h-file first, will get the desirable result. And there's nothing that black can do now to prevent white converting this into a perfect horizontal cut, because the h6 rook has given shelter for that white king to come in. I mean, you might see king f4. Let's just say that black plays a waiting move like a nicking here. You might see king f4, but we can just check king back to e5, and there's the perfect horizontal cut. So rook to b6, and yeah, black just kept the rook on the h-file. Just kept it there until the g-pawn was pushed, and then played king f5. So perfect execution of the defence. Yeah, I mean, they could have just agreed a draw there. There's all sorts of ways of drawing this. I mean, it's a knight's pawn as well, so you could actually just do a first-rank defence if you wanted to. But we've got the Philidor position, basically, and they agreed a draw there. Right, that's those 3 games. I liked them because they featured the theme of imperfect horizontal cuts and what we need to do there, on top of the 9 games on the previous video, which I don't think there were there any imperfect horizontal cuts? I can't remember. But that's everything on horizontal cuts done.